And if you could please stay muted at least throughout the talks. So as we go along as well, sorry, at the end of this, we'll have, say, 20 minutes to ask the speaker some questions. So if questions come to mind during those talks, just ping those in the chat, and that will be really helpful for later. And then if we just move it on one more. Smashing. So last time on 5Things, we had Vonnie, Emily, and Nathan. It was a really good talk. So I highly recommend checking that out on YouTube. The link to that is on the 5Things Twitter account. I can share that with anyone at the end. And then one more on, Sal. So this is just pack one. So this is our 7th 5th Things, and I just wanted to show all the books that we've looked at so far. It's quite a broad range actually, and a lot of the videos for these sessions are up on our YouTube account, so I really highly recommend checking those out. And all the lovely people that we've had, if you just look at all those lovely faces. And I'm really delighted to add 3 more wonderful faces to that illustrious group this morning. And the first one of those is Briana. And I don't know what to say about Briana. I've got a long list of things that Briana does. It's extraordinarily impressive. She is Executive Director of Creative Edinburgh, Co-Director of Creative Informatics. She's on the governing body of the University of York, Vice Chair of YWCA Scotland, the Young Women's Movement, and a mentor at the Delicate Rebellion. I have no idea how you managed to fit all that in, and a talk this morning. But Briana this morning is going to share her 5 things about Be More Pirate. Briana.
Thank you, Andy. And I think to answer that question without sounding too corny, like I'm selling that book, is maybe the way I manage to do all those things is because I am a pirate. So I'll tell you a bit more about this. So what's Be More Pirate about? And ignore this sticker up here. I'm just too lazy to take it off. But Be More Pirate was written by Sam Conniff Allende. I assume his last name is Spanish, so I'll go with that pronunciation. And it came out, I think, about 2 years ago. When you look at the Instagram, you can really see that he's building a movement around Be More Pirate. And that's because Be More Pirate is a movement. And this book, next slide please, is really about how we can learn specifically from Golden Age pirates. And this isn't just any pirate. The tools to positively change the world by challenging authority and why Golden Age pirates were so unique. But most importantly, this book is about how to use the tactics that Golden Age pirates employed in the time of kind of the fiercest pirates to make change. And I'm just going to quickly read something really short about pirates, because obviously when we think of pirates, we might think that, you know, pirates were pillaging and hurting people and stealing things, and they were, you know, vandals and bandits and the low of the low, but this isn't true. And this is why he specifically talks about Golden Age pirates as the period of pirating that we want to focus on. It says if we're going to understand how the pirates reshaped their world, we first need to understand how their world shaped them. This exceptional bunch of men and women didn't spring from nowhere. They were the products of turbulent times, and they were defined by what they fought for and stood against. The golden age of piracy is broadly understood to be the time between 1690 to 1725, with a particularly intense phase occurring in the 1710s that culminated in the creation of the Republic of Pirates on the Caribbean island of Nassau, where around 1,500 pirates were involved in a pioneering experiment in democracy that some argue was more participatory and more representative than anywhere else on Earth. In Nassau, right at the geographical epicenter of the slave trade, Black people lived in freedom alongside all other colors with broadly equal rights. Nearly 80 years before the French Revolution, demanded liberté, égalité, and fraternité before Thomas Paine wrote his book, The Rights of Man, and Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Men and women, rich and poor, had a more equal say and enjoyed more equal rights than any other society in the world at the time. So you'll have to read the rest of the book, but he goes on to talk about how these pirates established things like fair work, and there are a lot of actually principles of our modern day society around equality and justice that actually came from pirates who were inspired by other cultures around them. So, next slide. This is a picture of my hands. You're probably wondering why you're looking at it. And this was I get to say that I was once a hand model too, which was probably my greatest achievement. But this was for a campaign by a feminist perfume company, and it was called Damn Rebel Bitches. But I say this because this is to demonstrate that I too am a pirate. And the next picture is a picture, a very embarrassing picture of me, but I felt I had to share it. Back when I was probably 14 or 15, I was in, we don't look very punk, but I was in an all-girl, there's a guy over there, but I tend to forget about him. He was our drummer. Our drummers were few, well, not few and far between, the opposite. Our drummers rotated quite frequently, but I was in an all-girl punk rock band. And at the time, I attended a very conservative Christian school, and I think they thought we were the devil incarnate. But we did what we wanted to do, we did what we believed in, and from the very beginning I've been very pirate and just didn't know it. And you'll find out why in a moment. But being a pirate and embodying kind of the values of being a pirate is very much about not caring and doing what you like. And at the same time, around that time, I joined our all-boys tackle football team to the dismay of the other boys at my school. And I've always had the spirit of a pirate because I've always felt that, I've had a very low tolerance for injustice and a very high threshold for pushing past rules that don't make any sense. So 5 things. I hope I haven't already given away too many of my 5 things. The very first thing from this book is rebel. And that's something I'm very good at. And this is the first rule of being more pirate. Rebel and draw strength by standing up to the status quo. Now, at the time of the Golden Age pirates, they were rebelling against imperialism, they were rebelling against unfair rules, they were rebelling against the slave trade, they were stealing from the rich, giving to the poor, a bit of Robin Hood action. And that's the first fundamental rule of being a pirate. But it's about rebelling where you feel the status quo is in the wrong or is pushing people down. Or if you're going to be if you're being creative or if you're creating something new, it's about, what are you creating and how is that thing, action, product, service, idea you're bringing into the world helping you to stand up to the status quo, and is what you're doing an act of rebellion, which is probably the most obvious part of being more pirate. And 2 is about rewrite. So you've rebelled against the status quo, but it's not just about anarchy and it's not just about being disorganized and chaos. It's actually about, once you rebel, and maybe even before you rebel, how do you bend, break, and most importantly, rewrite the rules? We know when it comes to new products and services, new ideas bend and break the rules that currently exist or our current understanding of society. But also social movements have really rewritten the rules and pushed them. And, I've always really believed in the strength of, changing things by doing. So how are you rewriting the rules and bending them after you rebel? That's the second most important part of Be More Pirate. 3rd is reorganize. So that little excerpt did give us some insight into that, but these pirates were incredibly organized communities. They were organized in terms of how they attacked ships. They were organized in how they organized their societies. They had rules actually, but they had rules that they all collectively agreed to. But this is actually about, in our current modern context, how do we collaborate and achieve scale rather than growth? Now, this is about the principles of being a pirate, But I think even more importantly, especially when we look at the creative sector and creative industries and the current context of the pandemic and the economic crisis, you know, we've been having lots of conversations as a society, especially with the climate crisis, that is it all about growth? You know, and Prosperity Without Growth was written by Tim Jackson, I think, in 2008. And there's this whole idea of, yes, how do we collaborate to achieve scale and kind of reach a wide group of people, to transfer ideas and resources to others rather than growing them and hoarding them by the few. So that's what I would say that reorganized point is about: redistribution. And 4 is about redistribution, fighting for fairness, sharing power, and making an enemy of exploitation. So that's what the pirates were about. They really, you know, they were on the fringe of society. They'd left their communities. They decided to create a new one. But it's about being an enemy of exploitation. And again, thinking about the context of the creative industries, we have a real kind of oxymoron in some ways, so that's not entirely the right word, but just in the sense of, you have parts of the creative industries that flourish off of exploitation, you know, people working for free, unpaid internships, getting jobs or pieces of work simply for exposure, and that really contributes to inequalities within the creative industries, and people really not having access to parts of the creative industries, while equally on the same side of the coin, you have sectors and parts of the creative industries that are very against exploitation. It's all about pay. It's all about, you know, intellectual property and making sure attribution rights are given to people for their work. So I just think in the modern context, this whole idea of exploitation, particularly in the creative industries and our industries, is a fascinating one, because how are we fighting for fairness and sharing power? You can argue that the internet, social media, is allowing for a more equal playing field and allowing people to have more access to each other, ideas and resources, but then you still have about 26% of the country that's not online and doesn't have access to broadband in Scotland. So there's just a question there about redistribution and how do we approach this. And number 5, the last of our 5 things, is retell. So weaponize your story and then tell the hell out of it. And on this very point, and I kind of missed this in an earlier slide, but I'll say it now. I really do think that Scotland in particular is in a very important moment and has been at the cusp of something I'd like to call the Second Enlightenment. And it's the Second Enlightenment because it's the enlightenment of purpose-driven business, social enterprise, ethical businesses, values-driven businesses and organizations. And, you know, Edinburgh has actually been leading the charge around this. We have one of the oldest social enterprise incubators in Edinburgh, the Melting Pot, which has been going for about maybe 14 years now. We have Social Enterprise Scotland. We have the Voluntary Code of Social Enterprise, which is the only that exists in the world. And in terms of a business model, okay, the idea of generating income to reinvest in the organization for a social cause, environmental cause, or social purpose might not be new. But in terms of codifying this and in terms of actually creating a community around businesses that are values driven, that are thinking about giving back, that are led by the community and the needs of the community and maybe our planet and society, is something that's really kind of grown out of Scotland in the last 10 to 15 years. And this intersection of this purpose driven and ethical business, data, and the creative industries is happening nowhere else like this on the planet. And back to this 5th point about retelling and weaponizing our story, I don't think we do a very good job in Scotland, or the UK for that matter, about telling our story. You know, we have the Chancellor of Exchequer, I can never say that because I'm American and it's terrible, but just ignore me. I don't really want to remember his title, but we have Rishi standing here saying that, you know, creatives should just retrain. And I know that, you know, there's an argument there that, you know, his comment was taken out of context, but we've now had a, you know, UK government's campaign that's been rolled out this week that has images of people in the creative industries and saying, oh, well, like Fatima, the ballerina, putting on her toe shoes, and it says, well, Fatima might be a data scientist, she just doesn't know it yet. So I really would like, as a last call to action, because this is about doing and being more pirate, this is a plea out to the creative sector and the creative industries and people that work with those of us in the creative industries to weaponize our story and tell the hell out of it. You know, we are working in the fastest growing industry in the UK, and yet most people walking down the street and a lot of people in our government don't understand that. And why don't they? We're not telling our story well enough. So let's tell the hell out of it. And that's the end of Be More Pirate.
Wow, thanks so much, Briana. Oh, the crowd go genuinely mad. I just want to go and take some action now. So I think if we end up there, we'll all go out and rebel now and support the arts as well. That was like phenomenally inspiring. Thanks so much, Briana.
Thank you.
And also, yeah, I just got like the 5 R's. It took me a while, but
I can't roll my R's, so I'm
anyway, let's move on to our next talk. So Phil Dearson is up next, and I used to work with Phil around 40 years ago or something, back when we had to wind up the internet to get it going and dig for pixels down to mill. But he's now partner at Subsector and designer of the N2D method, which high level is to help those big businesses who struggle with making the critical decisions they need to make about their customer needs, actually make those decisions. So Phil is going to be sharing his favorite bits from how to take smart notes. Phil.
All right. Yes, how to take smart notes. Yes, this feels like a bit of a weird choice given some of the episodes of your thing. What do you call this? It's not a webinar, is it? It's a thing. It's a thing. Yeah, your thing. 5 things, in fact. So this is actually a very kind of practical set of tips, if you like, how to take smart notes. When I first started working with information, I suppose, and we all start doing this maybe at school to start with, maybe at university if you go to university or something like that. But then increasingly, it seemed to me, as I was going through my professional career, having to deal with information, having to take in huge amounts of information from all over the place and then figure out what to do with it and make something sensible out of it or draw some insights out of it, that cursed word, insight, but turn it into something. And there was just an increasing amount of information. There's just too much information in the world to be able to cope with as a human being. In fact, somebody, this is slightly related to this, which just occurred to me now. Somebody was saying that there's not too much information. We don't have information overload. We just have very poor filters. And this book is a little bit about how to work with filters on a personal level. So I started looking at note-taking apps and bookmarking apps. Does anyone remember Delicious from back in the early days? So, religiously bookmarking things and tagging things and classifying things and then going, oh, that's interesting. And now I need to make some notes and I'll try it in. I tried Evernote, I tried Bear, I tried Apple Notes, I tried, every conceivable fucking note-taking system in the world. Oh shit, sorry, is this a PG? It's not anymore. It's not anymore. And struggling with all these different tools and never really kind of finding something. I found that I'd be working on something, like trying to kind of gather my thoughts around a particular issue, and then digging back into my various different resources wherever they were, and finding that I'd already done all this. I'd done loads of thinking about this particular issue, and a lot of it was just remembering what I'd already thought in the past, and that was very frustrating. So it felt like I was wasting time. So this book is kind of about that. I read it about a year ago. If we move on to the next slide. There we go. So this is about the Zettelkasten, which is a groovy German word. I love German words because they just sum up increasingly obscure things in one great long word. The feeling of not having had quite enough tea in the morning before doing a 5 things talk. There'll be a German word for that somewhere. So the Zettelkasten is all about a technique. It's a simple technique to boost writing, learning, and thinking. This is the subheader of the book: for students, academics, and non-fiction book writers. I slightly take issue with the subtitle, but it's really for anybody who's working as an information worker. I mean, we're all to some extent an information worker these days. And the Zettelkasten is a system that was put together by a guy called, I've written it down because I keep forgetting, I've written it down in my Zettelkasten, by Niklas Luhmann, who was a renowned sociologist back in the 70s, 20th century, back 100 years ago. And he was an absolutely prodigious writer, author, and academic, and he produced 70 books over his lifetime, and about 400 different articles about sociology, and all very, very well, acclaimed. And when he was asked, how he managed to be so prodigious, he says, "Well, it's easy. I don't do anything where I have to try very hard. I use this system, and this allows me to kind of codify my thoughts and join my thoughts together." So a Zettelkasten, as he was using it, Zettelkasten is like a receipt or a slip of paper, and a kasten is a box. So it's a slip box or a receipt box, and he had these little wooden boxes, well, quite long wooden boxes, and he put lots of little slips of paper in there. I'm not going to talk about that. I don't find that particularly useful, but as applied to digital tools, I'll be thinking about this as a sort of 21st century information worker. And the Zettelkasten that I'm talking about is actually a joining together of about 3 or 4 different tools. For the first time, I started using this technique about a year ago, and it's probably a bit of an overstatement to say it's totally revolutionized the way that I think, but it kind of has. So let's move on to the first thing that I took out of the book, number 1. So writing is the medium in which thinking takes place, which is an interesting perspective. If you've ever been in the position where you've been asked to write something, or put a presentation together, or a proposal, or an article about something, whatever, I would always start off with, okay, well, what's my point of view? First of all, what is it I want to write about? And then what's my point of view? And then what kind of supporting evidence do I have that would help me make this argument, or something like that? The Zettelkasten is slightly different in its approach, in that it's a working tool. It's not just a set of notes. It's a way of going into your notes and elaborating on the notes that you've made. So there's an awful lot of evidence to suggest that elaborating on a particular point of view is one of the best ways of learning, or discovering your own opinion about things, or joining connections between one thought and another thought. So writing about your notes, elaborating on your notes, describing an idea in your own words, if you like, inside your tool, whatever you choose as your tool, is the way in which you cultivate your thoughts, or that your thoughts end up sort of rising to the surface. You don't start with your thought kind of emerges as you're doing your writing. That was the first thing that I took out of this. I suppose it's worth me noting as we're going along, because it might not make sense, but the tool that I'm using for this at the moment, I don't want this to feel like an advert for this particular system, but I'm using a thing called Roam Research, which is ROAM Research. And it's ideally suited to this kind of way of working. If we move on to the second point, nobody ever starts from scratch. So again, this whole point of, say you're having to write an article or a presentation, whatever it is, looking at that blank page and then trying to piece things together. We know much more than we think we know about stuff. And I find that it can't just be true of me, that I will start looking into what I previously thought about a particular issue and then find, oh God, actually I know quite a lot about this. We've been thinking about things in the background quite a lot of the time. Thinking doesn't happen always in a kind of a conscious way. It's percolating around there in the background. And a Zettelkasten, or a system like this, can help you draw the connections between these different things, the thoughts you've already had. I had this thought about this in the context of Stoicism, say, for example, and then I had a related thought over here, which I didn't know they were related. I had a related thought over here, which was about, I don't know, the traffic management systems, or roundabouts, or waiting in line to get served in a shop, or something like that. And you might find unexpected connections between things you already know. and that's where the creativity comes from. So linking these kind of mental models, well, that's a little bit grand. I mean, actually, a lot of the stuff that I end up linking in my system, they're fairly prosaic. You know, the things about breathing or walking or getting frustrated, and you just find these references that link together, and your thought kind of emerges from that, rather than having to start from scratch. The third thing I took from this book, standardization enables creativity. Now, I had kind of come across, I've been thinking about this quite a lot since going to drama school back in the day, long time ago. But one of the things that we studied there was Tai Chi, because, you know, they've got to pad out the syllabus, because it can't all just be pretending to be a snail or a monkey or something. Although you'd be surprised how much time is actually taken up by pretending to be a snail or a monkey when you go to drama school. But Tai Chi was one of the things that we ended up doing. And if you know anything about Tai Chi, or if you don't, I'm going to tell you, is a set series of moves. You have the short form and the long form. And you learn the moves. And a lot of your early work in Tai Chi is learning the moves. And it's only once you've learned the moves that you can then start to be free. You can start to be creative. Something else happens. You let go of the form. And you start to not drift per se, but you're free from the form by learning the form. And a similar kind of thing happens if you're learning your lines for, say, a presentation or for a performance or something like that. It's only once you've learnt those words sufficiently that you can get to a stage where the words are not binding you anymore. Something else happens and you become free. And I had started applying this with things like getting things done, if you've come across that particular approach to productivity. So taking a really big, chunky project and then breaking it down into all its component parts, putting all of those component parts into a system. So getting them out of your RAM, if you like, and putting them into another system. It kind of frees up the RAM then and takes a huge burden off your shoulders. You're not having to consciously think, did I forget this? Did I forget that? Did I remember this? And the Zettelkasten approach is kind of like that for your thinking, So by embracing a particular set of steps, and I'll come on to this, I think it's my last point, by embracing a certain set of steps, that allows you, it frees you from having to consciously think about things. It kind of allows these arguments or realizations to emerge while you're working with your thoughts and your notes and your bookmarks and all that kind of stuff. So if we go on to the next point, this is all getting a little bit more esoteric as we go along, which, you know, that's life. A mind like water. This is a phrase that comes up in the book a few times, and it's a bit like getting things done in some ways. So, you know, once you've embraced a system and you're using the system to the extent that you're not thinking about the system anymore, offloading your thoughts and your thinking, or you're working with your thinking in a particular way, your mind then suddenly stops being like putting up these little traps and barriers and little gotchas and it can't just be me. But your mind is sort of, it sometimes feels like it's trying to subvert you. Sometimes you're overthinking a particular issue and you're spending way too much time dwelling on a totally irrelevant point. When I'm working with a Zettelkasten, I've achieved this a few times, but it's one of the key points in the book, is that by working in this way, you can, almost in the opposite way to getting things done, you embrace disconfirming thoughts or disconfirming evidence. So when you come across things that challenge an idea that you've had, or you've discovered a particular point of view while you're working in your book, and you go, oh yeah, that's interesting because that's related to that, and that's related to that. Oh, and those things, oh, and together they might mean this. And then whenever you come across a bit of information which challenges that, says actually, there is a whole bunch of evidence that that is not the case, suddenly those things become really, really fascinating. They don't become blockers or challenges to the way that you are working. They become the way that your tide goes. Your tide, your brain naturally drifts into these areas, and you go, that's even more fascinating. So what does that mean then? If that disproves this, then maybe together those things mean X. And so you end up kind of, your thinking becomes this flow through all of the notes that you've made over the course of your entire life. Which brings me on to the last point, which is that tools and techniques are only as valuable as the workflow. So you're not going to get a tool. I mean, you might go and look at something like Rome Research, for example, or you might have Evernote or blah, 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 all these different sorts of tools and techniques. In and of themselves, they're not valuable. It's their position in the workflow that you use that is valuable. So embracing that system, like Tai Chi, again, having a form, a way of doing things, having a metacognition way, if you like. This is how I think about thinking. This is how I develop my thoughts. Having those steps in place so that they start to feel very, very natural and you're not thinking about the workflow anymore. Then suddenly the tools and techniques can actually start to become incredibly valuable. And this inspired me reading this book, which is really all about how to use slips of paper in a box. That doesn't work for me. I don't think it would work for many people. Not these days anyway, but that inspired me to sort of tie together a number of little different tools, and now it's working incredibly well. I feel like I've got a handle on what I know, and whenever I'm faced with a question, I know now how to answer that question in a really painless, very fluid way by embracing some of the principles of this system. I don't want to sound like a cultist. Tried that. Quite good actually, but it's not really my thing these days. So the workflow that tends, the high level principles of the workflow, if you like, are very simple, and it's capture, very similar to getting things done in some way. So capture, cultivate, and create. So you're capturing your information. You need a workflow for capturing stuff. What I do is I use Pocket to get bookmarks when I'm finding articles, and then I'll highlight things in Pocket. Pocket has an API which allows all of those highlights to then automatically go into Readwise. Readwise will also pull in all of the highlights that I make in Kindle. If I'm reading a Kindle book or I'm making notes on a particular paragraph, all of that stuff gets sucked into Readwise. Readwise then has an API which automatically sucks all of those notes and bookmarks into Rome Research. Rome Research is really the kind of master repository, if you like, my second brain. Not really a second brain, but you know what I mean. And then when you're inside Rome Research, it's very, very easy to start seeing the connections between all of these different disparate thoughts, or sometimes disparate thoughts. You start being able to join the connections between the two of them. And so when putting an article together or to help refine your thinking around a particular issue, it's really, really simple to just go, okay, well, that dragging these little snippets of information, tiny little elements of your notes, little blocks, they're called in Rome Research, pull these little blocks together to support your points of view, which then lead you off into other directions. You're just kind of creating then, sorry, cultivating is this. We go back. So you're capturing all your information. Cultivating then is going in and elaborating on some of these notes. And that has to become part of the workflow. That's the discipline bit. That was the biggest change, I suppose, in the workflow, is going in and then saying, all right, I'm going to cultivate this garden of the mind, if you like, by going in and finding these different notes and thoughts and then elaborating on them. So why did I find that interesting? What do I think that is related to? And as you're working inside your Zettelkasten, connections to other things where you've been discussing similar or related issues will also crop up. So you're cultivating the connections between all of these different thoughts. And then create is the last bit. So when you're going through this elaboration exercise, thoughts for things to do or new ideas will just naturally arise. And it's very easy then to just sort of put one of those aside and start putting some of these, dragging in some of these points from around your Zettelkasten. And the articles or the thought piece or whatever it is you're trying to express starts to come, it feels like it's creating itself in a way. So it doesn't feel like effort to sit and write, which it always has in the past. I think that's me.
Oh, that's a really muted to applause. Sorry, Phil. That wasn't deserving of the talk. Thank you so much. I was just thinking, thanks so much for that, Phil. It's phenomenally interesting. There's a ton of questions in chat as well, and we're just like running a little bit behind. So I was wondering if you could maybe dive in there and start answering those, because we might not have too much time at the end for Q&A. That'd be massively helpful. But we'll move on quickly to our last speaker of the day. I've already taken in so much information into my brain, and we've still got one talk to go, and that is Mike Coulter. A lot of people here probably know Mike already. He's quite the legend. He was an award-winning advertising copywriter. More recently, he's creative director on the hugely influential Side Projects report from the Do lectures. Then he turned his BDI to behavior design and trained with the one and only Stanford professor BJ Fogg in game-changing behavior design methods, and graduated as a full-on behavior designer. So Mike is going to share the best bits from Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. Mike.
Thanks, Andy. Hello, everybody. By the way, Andy, I just got a bit of a problem here. I think you said that the talk should be about non-fiction books. I overlooked the non bit actually, and I was going to talk about Rupert and the Three Bears for 10 minutes.
Oh, that I'm totally.
I better rethink this. Okay, I know you're strapped for time, so I'll use my faithful time of 10 minutes, hopefully, and let's get rocking and rolling. Okay, yeah, hi everybody. I'm going to tell you about Tiny Habits, and before I tell you about the book Tiny Habits, I'll maybe give you a bit of background. As Andy said, I work occasionally or sporadically for the Do lectures, and in 2016, I was doing a 3-month project for them called the Side Project Report, about how side projects and side hustles had led to some of the biggest successes in brands and companies in the world. The problem was, like a lot of creatives at that time in my life, I wasn't exactly on my A game when I needed to be. I was on something like my F game as a creative, you know, getting up to all sorts of mischief. Life just wasn't working at all. And I knew about the work of a professor at Stanford University called BJ Fogg, who was hugely influential in Silicon Valley, but he had a side project, and it was a thing called Tiny Habits. And he'd used it in his own life to get some really interesting outcomes. So I thought, you know, maybe I should actually look into this thing and get my head around the whole Tiny Habits thing. And in those days, this was pre-book, by the way. In those days, it was a free 5-day email-based course, and it was super simple. It was very Californian, slightly wacky, but I got into it, and lo and behold, it changed everything for me. I built some really strong habits, personally and professionally. I really enjoyed the project for 3 months, and we knocked it out of the park, and it was amazing. And so much so that I actually thought I need to know more about this, like a lot of creatives. And ultimately, I trained as a Tiny Habits coach and certified to train this stuff because I couldn't find anybody to train it, particularly working with creatives and innovative companies. And then BJ Fogg got in touch and said, hey, I'm writing a book. Would you be interested in collaborating? Me and maybe 20 other coaches. And we all collaborated on this, on the writing of this book. BJ did 90% of it, but the rest of us chipped in with anecdotes and ideas and suggestions, and we kind of helped stress test the book as it was coming to fruition. So what is the book about? Sal, if you can hit the next slide, please. It's really about the small changes that change everything. Essentially, Tiny Habits challenges some of the ideas about behavior change that many of us have tried to apply in our lives, often failing over the years. I'll go into that in a little more detail in a second. But also, this book is a twofer, and this is one thing I loved about the book. One is it's about how tiny habits can be used to build strong, new, full-blown habits in our lives. But it's also the first time BJ has written about a thing called behavior design. And behavior design is how a lot of some of the most successful companies in Silicon Valley, it's a set of models and methods to influence human behavior. And I find it really interesting. So it's it's kind of like a self-development book in a sense, but it's also a business book if you read between the lines. And actually, there's a secret chapter out on the web about tiny habits for business and how it can be used in the workplace. So I'll dive straight into the 5 key takeaways that I want to talk about. And the first one is the most kind of in-depth one in a sense. And tiny habits came out of a thing called the Fogg behavior model, which is what the tool that many Silicon Valley brands used to launch successful products. And what BJ Fogg reckons is that his Fogg behavior model is that no behavior, any behavior, asking someone out for a date, signing up for a newsletter, doing a to-do list for your shopping, asking someone to marry you, starting a business, no behavior happens unless three things come together at the same moment. Motivation to do the behavior. That motivation can be high or low, but certainly motivation to the behavior. The ability to do the behavior, it can't be impossible, and a prompt. And the prompt is the thing that says, do this behavior now. So advertising is a prompt. A red light when you're driving a car is a prompt. So we can come back to this in the Q&A in a bit more detail, but essentially the first takeaway is that here's in two sentences how all human behavior works. And if any one of these three is missing, if motivation, ability, or the prompt is missing, the behavior will not happen. Now, in 20, 30 years of working in advertising, no one had ever told me how human behavior really worked. That was a bit of a cock-up, really. No marketing director, no creative director, no head of strategy. Lots of people had their opinion how behavior worked, but nobody actually nailed it. And it took this professor at Stanford to actually articulate how he felt behavior worked. And of course, because it's from the university, there's a lot of research gone into this. So that's my first takeaway, that I discovered how human behavior worked. And the last little bit of this worth mentioning is that, of course, then if it's good enough for Silicon Valley to influence behavior, I thought, you know what, maybe I could use to influence my own behavior. And in fact, if you want to look at Tiny Habits was a spin-off, it spun out of this thinking of the Fogg behavior model and the whole models and methods of behavior design. So go to the second slide, please, Sal. Oh, sorry, yeah, so just while I'm here. So this is in graphic form how the Fogg behavior model works. So there's got to be a level of motivation, that's the y-axis. There's got to be some level of ability, how easy is it to do or hard to do. And then there's got to be a prompt that says, do this behavior now. And if you look at the graph there, the green line, the action line, above there is where behavior will work. And it will be a blend of motivation and behavior. But crucially, here's the interesting thing that I found in terms of Tiny Habits based on the Fogg behavior model. Next slide, please, Sal. Tiny habits live here in this purple column. This is where tiny habits live. Tiny habits are easy to do. Something you want to do that's easy to do. And if it's something you want to do, then you don't rely so much on motivation. You already kind of want to do it. And if it's easy to do, you're more likely to do it. The problem is that most of us are hardwired to think that we have to motivate ourselves to change. I remember my days as an advertising copywriter, we'd be working on government health campaigns. And more often than not, the solution that the client thought that was needed was to motivate people to eat 5 a day or to cut down on the booze or to stop smoking the fags and stuff like that. And we see this today. Too much advertising and marketing tries to motivate people to do something. And that's the last thing you should try. Motivation is great, but it's slippery. It goes up or down. Ability is much more reliable and much easier to design for. Has the person got the time, the money? Are they smart enough to see that this is good for them? Is it going to save them any physical effort? Is it part of routine? There are 5, we call it the ability chain. There are 5 levels there are 5 abilities and levels, what we call levels of simplicity. Okay, next slide, please, Sal. So a core tenet is help people do what they already want to do. Again, this is kind of informed by Silicon Valley. If you look at some of the most successful products in Silicon Valley, they already help people do what they already want to do. They don't have to motivate people because people already want to do it. And look at some of the examples of it. Airbnb did not invent the category of paying someone money to stay in their house overnight. People wanted to stay in bed and breakfasts for decades in cities. They didn't invent the category. They just made it easier to do. The app, the interface, the way that you used it. They didn't motivate. They made it easier. They helped people do what they already want to do. Uber did not invent the category or have to motivate people to call a car to drive them across town. Taxis have been around for years. Google did not help people search. People already wanted to search. Problem was when Google came along, people were searching with Yahoo and Alta Vista and all these tools. So Google just help people do what they already want to do and make it easier. Next slide, Sal, please. Help people feel successful. So when you're getting people to do the thing, help them feel successful. By the way, this underscores all of the tiny habits. Everything I'm talking about, say, so for brands and companies to do is for people. So in terms of tiny habits, we were talking before, it's like help people do what they already want to do. Don't try and build a habit in your life that your partner says you should do or you feel you should do. Match yourself to a habit you want to do. Then you won't have to rely on ramping up the motivation. Same thing. Help yourself feel successful. How successful do people feel when someone likes your shot on Instagram or puts a nice comment or you get new followers? We feel good. We feel successful. Conversely, if we actually think it's hard and we got to grind it out, go big or go home, my way or the highway, set the bar high, no pain, no gain, all that traditional stuff about changing behavior that we used to do, like when we try to build habits, how does that work out for us when we're really hard on ourselves? But when we can feel successful, you know, the reason people are addicted to Instagram is that they feel successful, it's easy to use, and when they feel successful, they get dopamine release. That's the whole of Silicon Valley runs on dopamine, in terms of they were informed by Las Vegas and slot machines and intermittent variable rewards. It feels good when you win and you get 3 oranges. They know that. So it's about helping you feel successful. It's the emotional relationship you have with the thing. Slide 4, please. So moving on from its emotion, emotions create habits. It's not 21 days to create a habit. It's not repetition to create a habit. It's not putting streaks on your calendar to create a habit. These all correlate to building, correlations of building habits, but they're not the causation. Emotions create habits. How you feel when you do the thing, how you feel when you eat that chocolate bar, how you feel when you sink that second glass of wine. Not 21 days, not repetition, not streaks, not rewards. It is reinforcement. If you want to know, habits can be instant if you get the emotions right. Here's an example. Give a teenage girl an iPhone for the first time. Does it take 21 days to build a habit for her to take it everywhere? Does it take 21 days, or do you need to reward or reinforce or put streaks and say, hey, keep the phone with me for 21 days and then you'll be using it automatically? No, it's the emotional attachment you have to the thing. Or if you see parents teaching a kid to walk, new habit of walking, kids wobbling about all over the place. Parents go, yeah, go for it, ramping up the dopamine, making the kid feel good, feeling good themselves, and the kid is more likely to do the behavior, to repeat the behavior when you feel good. We change best when we feel good about changing the behavior, not feeling bad. But look at all the classic crash and burn New Year resolutions behavior change methods that people use. Slide 5, please, Sal. The final thing, simplicity changes behavior. Make something easier to do initially. And this again has underscored some of the biggest successes in Silicon Valley. Google made searching easier. Airbnb made getting a room easier. Bloody Instagram made sharing photographs easier. Remember, we used to put photographs on Flickr, and then around the time that Instagram came on, it was all about bloody Hipstamatic, where in those days, we paid for filters. Simplicity changes behavior, because easy things stay easy to do and often get easier. And as we can do easier things, we can do harder things. And that's the whole tenet of tiny habits. Make the thing you want to do as simple as possible. Do what you want to do initially, feel successful about it, and use emotion to ensure that you'll do the thing again because it feels good, not because it feels bad and hard and tough. That's it.
Very go wild for Mike Coulter, as always. Thanks so much, Mike. Wow, I feel a bit tired now after getting all that information into my brain. We only have 5 minutes left, I'm afraid. We slightly ran over. I think in the chat, Phil has answered some of the questions that some folks have asked, so we won't cover those again. I was going to go quickly back to the start, actually. I'm like, to Briana, phenomenally interested. I suppose like in what, I don't know if you've got any insight into what motivated these golden age pirates to adopt or at least like create these principles, because they seem very important. I don't know if there's anything in the book that describes that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sam spends a lot of time talking about what motivated the pirates, and he would really argue that it was social and political shifts. And there's a whole chapter on all of the wars in that time period, particularly the European wars, and how there's actually quite a lot of frustration amongst people that were being put in these situations. You know, it was the French, it was the British, you know, it was just constantly the 12 Years' War, all sorts. So I think, you know, you need to read the book, but he'll talk about kind of the social and political factors that led to this, which was really a revolution in how society organizes, but also why in modern day we don't know this about pirates, because they were so successful and they threatened the status quo so much. Sam argues that there was a real campaign by those in power to rebrand pirates and pirating as something really negative and as something really rebellious in a disruptive way, but not in a good way. So that's what motivated them, and there's more in the book.
It's probably a common pattern throughout history to rebrand rebellion or any of these principles as a negative thing, isn't there? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would think so.
Darn.
No, they're just examples of how that's become a positive thing. I don't think rebellion's always branded as negative, but they were so successful at the time, they wanted to make sure to push that success down.
We've just got a few more minutes, and I don't know if anyone's got any questions for any of the speakers, or any of the speakers have got any questions for the other speakers, which is always interesting.
I got something to say, Andy, about a couple of questions that came up in chat.
Of course.
Yeah, from Simon, how do we use the techniques at scale, i.e. to solve the big issues, global warming and such? Not 9 o'clock yet, Simon, for God. I think one way to look at it in terms of both tiny habits and behavior design is often we jump in and try and hit the big score. And this actually speaks a little bit of what Phil was talking about when he was talking about steps. And I think in terms of the global warming thing, I've got to solve global warming in 30 seconds, but it's what we would say solving global warming might be behavior 37. But what's behavior 1? What's behavior 1 that I can do? Like, do I know what day is recycling? You know, how am I doing my little bit for global warming? So you'd actually break it down into baby steps and sort of, I'd break it down to baby steps and work on my bit. It's a little bit like, you know, we talk about go big or go home, no pain, no gain. Trying to solve global warming from the get-go is a big ask. So I think I'd reverse engineer it and say, what's the simplest, tiniest thing I can do now that I am able to do and motivated to do in the war, you know, against global warming? It's probably a really interesting point. It's probably, you know, we could do an hour on that. So, but I think essentially is break it down into tiny things that I have got the capability to make an impact for, and then take it from there. And then, of course, you can grow it from there and do more and more. And Andy, your question: would you try and elicit negative emotions to remove a bad habit? No, I wouldn't. If you remember the fog behavior model, a behavior happens when there's motivation, ability, or a prompt. First thing I'd do is, let's say I want to stop eating, I'll give you a real example. So in the summer, I went crazy for some reason. I know it sounds a good thing, but it wasn't. Eating fruit. All these great cherries came out from Kent, and peaches and and I was getting great. And there's fruit everywhere in the house. And every time I passed it, I got the prompt. There's some cherries, pop a few cherries. Every single time. And I was eating a ton of fruit. Too much fruit. So I thought, well, how do I use behavior design and how do I redesign the habit of eating it all? So I stopped buying so much fruit. It wasn't there staring at me saying, eat me. So I removed the prompt. And that's the first thing you always try to do when you try to change the behavior, remove the prompt. Or if that's not working, then you move to ability. Make it harder to do, make it harder to eat fruit. Fruit's not in the house, it's harder to do. I've got to go and get it. Quick example of that. I was also doing this one, drinking too much after work. I'd finish work and I'd be straight in the fridge for a cider or a lager in the garden. I didn't want to remove the prompt. I like a drink in the evening sometimes. So it wasn't about saying no booze in the house. So I made it harder to do in terms of the ability. So what I did was I promised my wife I wouldn't do it. I started leaving beer in the shed, so I had to put it in the fridge so it wasn't cold. But in terms of, you know, motivation, ability, and prompt, I put a new prompt and then I replaced it with a new behavior. And I left my bike outside the shed as a prompt. When I finish work, I jump on my bike and I go for an hour's bike ride. I replaced the bad habit, but I didn't try and make myself. Remember what you said about, you were saying, do you elicit negative emotions? Who wants to feel negative emotions at any time? Not me. They come out of they show up anyway. I'm not going to manufacture them. So it's all about, we change best by feeling good. So I'd be out on the bike, I'd feel good, but I hadn't tore into the lager at 6 o'clock and I was waiting until 7 or half 7. And sometimes the motivation to have a beer had gone after the bike ride. So that's kind of how I worked with that. Over.
Thanks, Mike. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's 9 o'clock. I'm really disappointed to say that we've got to finish up there. I could chat about this for at least another couple of hours. I think, like, finally, just a round of applause for our 3 wonderful speakers. I thought it was absolutely fantastic today. So, I'm sure they won't mind you reaching out to them on whatever social channel they exist on if you've got any further questions. But yeah, we'll finish up there for today, and thanks so much for getting up so early and joining us. I hope you've benefited from it. I certainly have. My brain is all a fizz. But yeah, we'll say goodbye for now, and hopefully see you next time. Bye.